So in the last section we created this desktop applications. Now let's move on and start creating enterprise applications. So let's go to the services tab and see if Glassfish is already registered with NetBeans. If it's not there, we can register it. So let's remove this and let's register our instance. Add server Glassfish 3.1. its installation directory is, we have directly installed it in C drive, right? Go over here, Glassfish, next, allow access, okay, and finish. That's it, service registered. You will have to do one more thing. Go to property and just uncheck this start registered Derby server because we are going to use MySQL. Close. Now let's start our Glassfish server. Right click, start. The server gets started. In one of the previous sections I had mentioned that JPA entities can be packaged in the same jar file as our EJB, the session layer. So this is the configuration we are going to use because it's perhaps the simplest configuration to start using JPA in enterprise applications. Create now the EJB application and we are going to package the entities, JPA entities in the same EJB jar file. Right click, new project, Maven, and this time we'll select EJB module and we are going to package the JPA entities in it. Now let's name the application my app, next, and the server is going to be what we have just registered, and the version, Java EE version will be Java EE 6. Maven is downloading some artifacts. Now let's start doing the same example which we are doing in the desktop applications, but this time we'll be using the EJB module which will be finally deployed on the server. So basically the main difference between these two applications is in this file, the persistence.xml file, in our desktop applications the database settings were mentioned directly in the persistence.xml file. This is not so in our enterprise applications. The database will be configured on the Java EE server and only the name of that resource, or basically the JNDI name of the resource, will be mentioned in the persistence.xml file of our EJB module. So let's see how to do it. Right click, use this entity classes from database. Now we have to create a new data source and this data source will be created on the Glassfish server. We have to select a database connection. So let's give it a name by which we'll refer it in our application, JDBC/ZooDB. So basically this dialog box, new classes from database, not just helps us in creating artifacts in our application, but it did create one artifact directly in the Glassfish server. Now let's add one of the tables, staff, add, next. We won't be using this, we haven't discussed this at all. Let it create the persistence.xml file and let it be as it is. So here is the entity class, and if you see the source main resources folder, in the meta.m folder, basically this folder, whatever is there in this folder gets packaged with the application. And here it is. So as you can see here, there are no database settings directly mentioned over here. Whatever the name of the resource is there on the server, that name is mentioned over here. Basically we now have an entity, we have the persistence.xml in meta.m folder. It hadn't added the driver for us, MySQL driver, so let's add that dependency, MySQL. Let's select this, add. So now if you see the POM file, you shall see that dependency which is over here. So here is what was created. First, we will just remove the annotations which we haven't studied by now. Remove this. The table name is same as the class name, so we won't require this. Let's remove this annotations. As I mentioned before, identity means the database will auto increment in the primary key. We will remove all of this and let this be for now, I guess. Okay, just save it. In the desktop application which we had done previously, we had created a class like this which contained the main method which was used to run the application, but not so in our EJB applications. There is nothing like a main method. So for testing this class staff.java, which is our entity, we will be using a session bean. Session beans is a topic of next chapter, but we'll be just creating a sample bean just to show an example, because we need a client to test the application. So before we create the session bean, let's maintain some orderliness in our application. Let's just move it into a proper package. Rename. Let's rename and let's put entities at its end. So basically our entities will be placed in this package com.mycompany.myapp.entities, and let's create a new bean which will be our client, or basically which will be able to run our entity. So let's create a session bean and let's name it my tester. Let's select a package. Now since this is a bean, not an entity, we'll put it in the proper package. Let me select singleton over here. What this is, I'll explain it later on. Let's just create the artifact first. Now singleton bean is one of the session beans which will be discussed in the next chapter. Right now we will use the singleton bean as if it's our main method. Now how are we supposed to do that? So let's make this as startup. Let me just do it and then I'll explain you. Startup. Then next thing I want to do is create a method, void and let's annotate it with post construct. Singleton means there will be just one instance of this bean in the application server. Now basically startup means that an instance of this bean is created when this application is deployed to the server, and this method is run when this instance gets created. Basically when you put this application on the server, one instance of this class gets created and this method gets run, which somehow acts like a main method, doesn't it? Let me just give you one big bad warning right now. This is not the way to test your applications. This is not the proper way to test your application. Singleton beans are not meant to test your applications. I am using this facility because it's kind of my quick and dirty hack just to see your application at work. Now in the desktop application you created the entity manager using the entity manager factory, which was obtained from the persistence class. Now in Java EE it's much more simpler to get an instance of the entity manager. You just inject the entity manager in your class like this. I'm just copy pasting some code. Here it is. You just inject the entity manager in one of your field. I named it EM, and the name will be just like in our desktop applications. The persistence unit was mentioned over here. In our application the persistence unit name will be mentioned over here. So the persistence unit name in our case is this. Let me just copy paste over here, and that's it. Now in this class we'll be directly be able to use this entity manager. We don't need to create the entity manager factory, neither use a persistence class. Another benefit of using this Java EE application instead of our desktop application is over here we created the transaction, we started, we committed it. Not so in our EJB application. Basically all the methods in our beans do happen within a transaction. We don't need to start or end it. Every method takes place within a transaction. More about transactions will be discussed in the chapter on EJB. So let's now persist an entity. Let's create a new instance. Staff is equal to new staff. Let's assign some field values. Set name, let's assign some other fields. Set gender, female. Staff dot set age 26. Staff dot set salary, let's make it 15k. Okay, now as before, let's persist it. So entity manager dot persist and staff. So let's now deploy this application on the server. Now we'll select run. Run basically deploys the application on the server. Now Maven will take some time to download dependencies if there are any. If you see this tab, my application has been deployed, was successfully deployed. Now let's see in table named staff, select rows. There it is. Now just to show another example, let's delete this entity with an ID of 5. Go over here, ID 5. So I'm just printing out a statement deleting ID staff with ID 5. This will be basically output in the server log, which is over here. So let's just save it. As I said, the application gets deployed when you save, and there it is. Now let's see, let's refresh, and that entity is gone. So basically, whenever you make changes and save the changes, the application gets redeployed to the server, and that's very useful for development. So let me just explain you the benefit of using the Java EE environment. Basically, we do not create the entity manager from the entity manager factory, we just injected it. And secondly, the transactions are started and committed for us as we start and end the method.